Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's fantastic to see such a great attendance for what will be one of the highlights of our summit. Once again, can I make my now familiar plea? Can you turn your mobile phones, your Nexus 1s, onto silent, or preferably to have them off? Only the Nexus 1. Blackberries and iPhones as well would be good. There's no company that better represents the tremendous opportunities in the new media environment than Google. We're delighted to have the chairman and CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, with us. He's going to talk about what is probably the single most important challenge and opportunity for the industry today, and that's innovation. Eric's going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then he will take questions from you all, so please don't be shy.
Thank you, Crispin. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. It's a delight to be here, and I wanted to suggest to my friends at Publicis and to the Abu Dhabi country that we should rename this not the Media Summit, but the Summit about Magic, because the magic that is possible about information, education, and entertainment, all of the things that information in the sort of most fundamental way is what we're really about. And I come to you to say that essentially every assumption that we have made about the way technology works and the way the media industry will work are in the process of being upended. That's what this summit is about, and that's what I want to address. And in fact, one of the things to start with is if you ask the average American what's going on in the Arab Middle East, no one will talk about the internet. But in fact, this area has the fastest growing internet in the entire world and has for the last 3 or 4 years at 100% a year. That's incredible. If you compound that, trust me, you get to a very large number very quickly. Furthermore, 1/3 of the population is under the age of 14. So in 5 years, they're going to be 19. Trust me, in the next 5 years, they're only going to live on the internet because that's what teenagers do. It's interesting that Abu Dhabi, where we are now, is going to become the first literally city and I think country fully served by fiber to the home. Another example of leadership here in the Middle East that nobody knows about, except for you guys. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about why that's so important. Now, the changes that are going on in the internet itself, something which I spent an awful lot of time on, are in fact just as interesting as those that are going on in the media. Historically, we think of the internet as you get on the internet and you go to a web page. Well, that was the old internet. That was the internet from 5 or 10 years ago. It's the one that we all sort of grew up with. But in fact, there's a set of trends, which I want to highlight, that are in fact going to define how the internet itself changes over time. The first and most obvious one is mobile. I have been struck by the explosion in mobile computing. Typical example. When we announced one of our more recent social products, the best and most interesting features were on the mobile version of the products. And furthermore, our smartest engineers are now building mobile-enabled applications. They start with a mobile-centric application, not a desktop application. So you say, why is that important? That's a huge shift from my generation of computer scientists, executives, and corporations. Mobile first. Now, the numbers are staggering. Mobile web adoption, which is what I'm talking about, is growing at the equivalent point 8 times faster than the same statistic 10 years ago for the personal computer. So not only is it bigger, it's occurring quicker. There are more smartphones right now than there are personal computers. And furthermore, the growth rate is much, much higher. So clearly, it's going to win. Half of all of the new internet connections are on mobile devices. Everybody here, when you use your mobile device now, are using the internet for all sorts of reasons. It's interesting that in many countries, mobile is now the primary way to access Google. An example would be Indonesia, South Africa, Nigeria, Brunei, and Liberia, which have relatively new internets. The trend is mobile first. Very interesting. It's interesting here, more than 100% of the citizens have mobile phones. Everybody has at least one, maybe more. Eastern Europe, right? Another set of countries that nobody ever thinks about. 130% penetration of mobile phones. So all of a sudden, the mobile device is not just a phone. Now, this has a lot of implications for what we're doing. Because a mobile phone, those of you know what I'm talking about, you have them in your hands. You think of them as a phone, but what they really are is they're a pretty powerful computer. The Nexus 1, which Crispin just talked about, is a 1 gigahertz processor. It's 1,000 Sun workstations that I worked on 20 years ago. And I remember what it took to install 1,000 workstations in a corporation. And now you literally have that in your hand. And wait till next year because of Moore's Law, and the year after, and the year after. So all of a sudden, you have the power literally of a supercomputer in your hand. Pretty interesting. So what can you do with that supercomputer? Well, of course, you could take pictures. You could take movies. It knows where you are. You can do maps. You can get lost. All the things that we all do with our phones today. But you could do something else, which is you can run powerful computer software that uses the network to do things that are phenomenal. Now, the most interesting way in which you see this is in the social sites. 1 out of every 6 minutes online is now spent on a social network. There are all sorts of interesting things. One fellow decided when he was getting married to tweet that I do to his spouse. This is a little much. It's interesting that Russia has the highest percentage use of social networking in the world. I didn't know that. Found it on Google. Amazing. In Australia, there were 2 girls who were trapped in a culvert, right, and would have literally died, ages 10 and 12, and they were smart enough to use their mobile phones. What did they do with their phones? They updated their Facebook page, and they were rescued. And I'm not making that up. Shows you what the future is going to be like. So when you think about this in the social area, does this matter to marketeers? You betcha. One study said that 20%, roughly 19% of all the tweets in Twitter mention a brand or a product in some form. That's an advertising opportunity for somebody who can figure out how it's going to work. So we have this mobile explosion, but we have something else. We have the back end. This is called cloud computing. And cloud computing is the general term for large data centers of servers. So the new model, old model was you had a powerful computer on your desk. And by the way, that computer was expensive, hard to maintain, and full of viruses, unfortunately. The new model is these mobile devices, which I'm talking about, which everybody here knows and uses. But your mobile device is connected by the internet to a very, very powerful set of servers. Servers from Google, but also from eBay, Facebook, Microsoft, you name them, Amazon, and so forth. Now, what can you do with all those servers? Well, remember, your phone isn't lonely anymore. It's talking all the time to these literally millions of servers. One thing it can do, by the way, is it can do translation. So you say, oh, I speak lots of languages, no big deal. Well, to give you an example, we translate 160 million web pages per day in over 70 languages. Okay? By the way, we don't do it with a dictionary. This, to me, was amazing. What we did is we built some software that took reference copies of, this manuscript and this manuscript in 2 different languages. And now any use of that language that we come up with, we can statistically translate. And we come up with a pretty good approximation of what that is. So now, and we're on our march to 100 by 100, 100 languages to 100 languages. So all of a sudden, you can literally read anything. So you go, okay, well, that's pretty impressive. By the way, this is really impressive. Okay, but what does that mean with your mobile phone? That means that you can text to somebody who you can't talk to. Have I got you now? Okay, well, that wasn't so impressive. Okay, you didn't like that. Okay, let's try again. Okay, have you ever had the problem, you speak so many languages, I know. Have you ever had the problem where you're in a restaurant and you can't read the menu? Take a picture. We'll do optical character recognition, translate the menu, and tell you whether you will like that food or not. Oh, you're not impressed with that? You're impressed. You're not impressed. Okay, look. Let me give you the one that's, so we'll take a picture of my friend Jim, compare it against our corpus of pictures of Jim, and we'll tell you who he is. Ooh. We decided not to turn that feature on. It wasn't your fault, Jim. No, it was in fact because we don't quite know what to do about this yet. But that's what image recognition combined with those servers is like. Okay, well, what about voice translation? What about hearing your voice? It used to be that when you would talk into your phone, you had to have all that knowledge. Well, now when you dictate it into your phone, it sends it to the servers, and 100 computers in parallel do the translation and give you the text, and we do it better than anyone else in the world. So if you want to understand the future of the internet, don't think of it as pipes and tubes, which is what I built in my career. Think of it rather as a mobile device. And by the way, when I say phone, you might have a really big phone, like a phone about this big, also known as a tablet. Make sense? Big screens, little screens, you might have a tiny screen. And you're going to have them from many vendors, including using Google's Android operating system. My point here is that this is all about scale. Now, how big is this? Between the dawn of the world and 2003, we the world, constructed 5 exabytes. An exabyte is basically 1,000 gigabytes. So it's a big amount of information. Today, we produce the same amount in 2 days. No wonder we're tired. No wonder we're exhausted. No wonder we're confused. Okay. Now, by the way, Google sees this as a search opportunity, so trust me. So we love all of this. But you wonder, why is it so hard to know anything? Because there's so much to know? Well, the answer is, we've been producing more information than we have at a rate that is just extraordinary. Now, you sit there and you go, okay, well, 5 exabytes in 2 days. Okay, well, the current forecast in 2013, 667 exabytes per day. So not only is it unmanageable today, it will be even more unmanageable in 3 or 4 years. We now there are many, many estimates of the size of the internet, but I think the best way to think about it is we were worried that we were going to run out of devices and what are called IP addresses. But we've now come up with a new standard for the internet called IPv6, which will allow 2 to the 128th devices. And for those of you who don't know the math, it's an extraordinarily large number. It's a number that's on the order of the number of atoms in the universe. So trust me, we can connect internet devices to your shoes, to your watch, to figure out what you're up to, so forth and so on. All the things that people want to do, we can now do with the internet. The US Embassy in Beijing now tweets every hour the air quality. In case you ever wanted to know, just sign up to their Twitter page. When you get all of that information in one place, you have this powerful network, cloud computing, and the mobile device. Magic ensues. And that's fundamentally the future of technology. And we all tend to think of this as something that is fixed. You know, okay, we're done. We're done. My BlackBerry is as fast as it needs to be. My phone's as fast as me. My camera's as fast as it needs to be. And I have all the information that I need. That's not happening. The rate of expansion of information and the internet is not slowing down. 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it will be enormously greater. There may be some limits, but we're not anywhere near them. So for example, if you enable, there are a lot of obvious things that you can do with this. You have your phone. Well, your phone knows where you are. With your permission, and you need to give us your permission, we can track where you are. The next logical step, of course, is tell your friends where you are. Okay? Some people do that, again, with your permission. But the next thing that we can do is predict where you're going. Right? Because you tend to go to the same places. Magic. So what does this mean to us in the media industry, now looking at the impact of this? Well, I think it means a different way of thinking about the way media is done. Google did a Super Bowl ad. Those of you who are not Americans, Super Bowl is iconic in the United States. And we had roughly 100 million viewers of the Super Bowl. We were very happy with our ad. There were 500 million people who looked at the same ad on the internet. Interesting. Very interesting. Gives you a sense of the scale. That was a good ad. Okay, nevertheless, we did both. So I would assert to you that The new model is going to be the inversion of the model that we grew up with. It goes something like this. If you're a famous television producer, you'll build a show on the internet first and see how well it does, because that doesn't cost you very much. And if it gets traction, then you'll go armed with strong negotiating skills and real numbers to distribution partners, advertising partners, and so forth, and raise additional money to finish what you need to get done. So think of the internet as an opportunity to reach people in a low-cost and new way that was never available to you before. It's not going to replace the existing models. It's not going to replace movies and television. Sales are up. People love to go to the movies, all of that. But you'll use it in a different way. You'll use it to test things. You'll learn to learn things. You'll learn it to do short things. You'll use it as part of a broader strategy. So I like to think of that as internet first. You'll start there, and then as it evolves, you can go to the larger and more established markets rather than the other way around. And all the significant media companies that I know of are thinking in these terms now, so I know that this will be true. Now, let's think about news. Remember I talked about the phone, which remember can be a pretty big phone, like maybe a tablet. Let's talk about newspapers. Everybody here, and I in particular, love newspapers. But my newspaper doesn't know some things about me that would be useful. For example, it doesn't know what I wrote yesterday, what I read yesterday, excuse me. But my mobile device knows who I am, knows where I am, knows what I care about, knows what I read, can summarize for me what's going on, and can help me turn the page. Now, is that going to happen? Take a look at the Kindle. Today's Kindle does not have the performance and the color graphics and so forth that I'm sure future versions that it will. But my important point here is if you want to see the future, look at those devices and imagine a more targeted news device. They will ultimately replace many of the printed versions of the same thing. Oh, you don't like that? Let's try magazines. Magazines are phenomenal. I love magazines. I love the pictures. I love, they even add fragrances in some cases. We haven't quite figured out a way to do that on computers yet. But they have beautiful photographs and so forth. We can do the same thing now with these mobile devices. But we can do something else. In advertising, the advertising can be more personal. It can be more dynamic. All of the announced and most of the rumored tablets have dynamic, targeted advertising as a key component of their media strategy, occurring this year. Where will it go? I don't know. I don't know how the standards will evolve. But what I do know is that an advertisement that is more targeted is worth more money. That the ads that are shown on my television at home that don't apply to me are a waste of advertising. Wouldn't it be better if they were more targeted? We, Google, are doing similar things with television, with set-top boxes and so forth. It's the same principle. So one of the things that we know about media is that because the internet platform that I'm describing is so targetable, you can get more effective advertising models, and those more effective advertising models bring in more money. So today the whole industry is concerned with the loss of analog revenues, a legitimate concern. But eventually, if you follow my reasoning, the revenue in the digital world should be higher, not lower. And it should be higher because the advertising is more targeted, the user is more focused, the outcome is more measurable, and we can produce a better viewing, consumption, and innovation experiment for the end user. If this is not true, then we're all in big trouble, which hopefully is not true, because everyone's moving here anyway, and the consumer will get what they want. They eventually always do. And they want entertainment, they want information, and they want their education, and they're going to get it online. Now, if you think about it, how do you approach this problem? There's a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote, don't be too timid and squeamish about your actions. All life is an experiment. We tend to accept the structures that we grew up with as though they are fixed, that God somehow decided that there will be these corporations and these laws and these countries and these static outcomes, and everyone will behave exactly the same way. That's not been my experience. Technology allows people to be enormously creative. Think about Facebook and YouTube, two of the leading brands now in the online social age, especially if you're a young person. They basically didn't exist more than 5 years ago. There will be another one, and another one, and another one. The hottest category right now in this space of social interaction are in these complex, essentially social mapping applications, companies like Foursquare and Gowalla and so forth, which might be the next Twitter or might not. My point is there's another one, and then there's another one, and there's another one. So if you assume the current structure holds, then you're wrong because you're ignoring the lesson of history. So the way to think about this as a media person, which is what we all are, is to think of it as a ship and iterate scenario. Prototype early and often, gather and analyze the data, because you can measure everything, and try again. And measure and try again. And instead of having someone run up to you and say, well, I'm absolutely sure and I know and so forth, I always say, prove it. I don't really care what you think. I care what your users think, and you can ask them. Why? Because every one of them has a mobile phone. Everyone has a way of testing. If you're not doing that, you're not running your business, in my view, in the right way. It's interesting that the Facebook and YouTube example now constitute 9% of all the time online. So what will be there 5 years from now? Presumably something new. More than 25% of American mobile users spend more than 2 hours each day in the applications that are in their phones. Now that's a frightening number, because that time is taking away from something else. So do you have an application on a mobile phone that advantages your business, your customer, your advertisement, and so forth? If you don't, you're not playing and somebody else might beat you. You have to figure out how to do this. There's a company called Pandora that does streaming music. It's particularly successful in some parts of the world. There's also one in Europe that's equivalently successful. 80% of new Pandora listeners activate the service on a device other than a computer. Again, the shift is happening. Volkswagen launched the new GTI model in the US with an iPhone app. They started mobile. They started internet. And by the way, then they did the other media as well. So you do it together. So if this is so obvious, why is everybody so confused? Well, I think part of it is because we've all grown up with these well-defined borders. I grew up when radio was actually radio, and when a record store actually had records in it. Right? That's my model, right? Programmed from birth. All those boundaries are gone. They really are gone. Everyone is your consumer, is your customer, since you can reach them pretty much directly. You can bypass traditional distribution channels. Pretty much everybody's also your competitor, because the barriers to entry for a startup are now lower than ever. So you have this enormous explosion of new online entrants with very low capital costs, very creative people who could ultimately become the next large competitor of yours. And of course, everyone can also be your partner, because these online R&D experiments are, in fact, how all the creativity occurs. So I hope I've convinced you that the renaming of the summit should be the Magic Summit. And you'll consider my proposal. That was an absolutely yes. We heard it from the boss. Because it's really about information, education, and entertainment. We have a platform, we have a mechanism, we have an advertising model, we have a subscription model, and most importantly, I think we all have the will to make this happen. If you do this, and you do it right, you can talk directly to your end users, and you can relax and have a really good time doing it. So with that, thank you very, very much. Let's see, Crispin, I think Crispin wanted me to do some questions, so maybe people have comments or questions on this. Yes, ma'am. You'll have the first question. Hi there. Nice to see you again. Let's see if do we have microphones, sir? That way everybody can hear you.
I'm Raghida Dargham of Al Hayat. We know each other.
Nice to see you again.
Thank you. Well, thank you for scaring the daylight out of me today, because you have too much control. Google does and will have a lot of control over our lives. So my question to you is that how are you going to deal with this, especially that the new generation is flooded with information you are controlling, you and others, that is to say. And how do you foresee the generations processing this information differently? In a nutshell, where do you see the society in 20 years from now in reaction to what you're giving us brilliantly, I must add?
Well, thank you very much. I think, let me state it negatively in the first context. I'm very worried about the loss of what I call deep reading. What I noticed is that everyone I work with spends all of their time in short form. Short message, short communication, short interrupt, and so forth. And all of the analysis says that we don't multitask very well. That human beings, the science says, are better off at focusing on one thing and then focusing on something else and so forth. So I worry that there is an impact of the internet and this crazy life that we all have. So I'll say it negatively. Now, I obviously believe that the benefit of what I'm describing is overwhelming. So let's start with one of the fundamental goals of our society was for people to actually be able to communicate with each other. And in the next 5 or 10 years, it will be possible for essentially everyone to be able to communicate. Another interesting fact is that about 1 billion people are going to come online in the next 3 years because of mobile phones. They have never been heard from before. They're in countries I've never visited. They're in countries that we ignore. They're in languages that nobody here speaks in this room, and there are 1 billion of them. What do they want? Are they the same as us? I hope so. We're going to hear from them for the first time. But just as the globalization in the last 10 years has had the benefit of lifting 2 billion people out of abject poverty roughly into the middle class, at least in their country's middle class, which is a remarkable achievement from a health and education perspective, we're going to hear these new voices. I think that is wonderful. I've always believed that the objective of all of us, and in particular in this region, should be about tolerance. And in order to get tolerance, you have to have understanding. And by translating things automatically, by allowing people to communicate, and so forth, we're going to make that. I think the final comment I would make is that the people who live their lives online think a little differently. They don't think quite in as stovepiped a way. They're not quite as nationalistic. They're not quite as subject to identity politics. And it's possible to reach them on an individual basis about the things that they care about. And that's a tool or technology that all of us can use to make the world a better place. Some more questions. Let's see. We'll try over here. Yes, sir.
My question is, all this information that you have about us, where does it go?
Google servers.
Who has access to that?
Google employees, under very careful rules.
Does that scare everyone in this room? And the other thing is those 3 million...
Would you prefer someone else?
It scares me either way.
Do you have a particular government that you would prefer to be in charge of this?
What I'm afraid of is that you might turn into a government.
The governments are working very hard to prevent that.
Those 3 million people, those 3 million people that are going to have access.
I should say, by the way, that these days, we're quite highly regulated on these matters. And in most countries, there are now some very, very significant consumer protection laws which we're subject to and which we obviously honor. I understand the concern that you have about personal information and so forth.
I'm pretty sure everyone will share that as well.
Of course. One way to think about it is that if we were to violate that, if we were to violate your trust, not only would you become upset, but everyone here would they wouldn't trust us as well. And our competitors would win and we would lose. So we have a high incentive to maintain your trust. Go ahead.
My other question is, where is those 3 billion people who are going to have phones coming from? Is it Pandora?
Phones? No, Pandora is a music service.
No, I'm talking Pandora as an avatar.
I'll let Jim talk about avatar, because I can't quite channel that language without my Google Translate. Is it not? It's the Navi language, right? I can't quite translate it, but maybe you can with me. One of the great success stories of our world has been the development of telecommunications networks with these basic SMS-enabled phones. The number of people who are coming in what we think of as inexpensive phones, $20, $30 phones, through networks like the MTN network and so forth in Africa, has really given people information that's crucial to them. Typical example is that with SMS queries, and Google does a lot of this, you can, with an SMS question, you can actually ask a question like, what's the weather? And you sit there and you go, well, the weather, it's sort of hot here we are in the Arab world. If you're a farmer in Africa, the weather will determine your planting schedule, and if your planting schedule is not correct, your family will go hungry. So the importance of these small networks, and in particular the basic level phone, for people who've never had any communication, cannot be overstated. Let's see, there was a question over here. Yes, go ahead. Why don't you give the mic to those, and why don't you give the mic, sir? Pass the mic over there. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Pranay Gupta. I work for the Dubai government. This is not a government question because I would be taken away in handcuffs, but this is a very personal question. In the old days, meaning my days when I was a journalist, the idea of spreading revolutions or messages used to be underground. You know, you exchange notes, and you're familiar with all of that. Do you see three things? One is, do you see social change engendered by, I guess, mechanisms like Google when it comes to issues like women's rights, for example, children's rights, abuse of minorities, and so on? Second question is, do you see political change occurring as a result of vehicles such as Google? And in a larger sense, do you see the alleviation of poverty and other global issues being addressed by mechanisms such as Google? The reason I ask you these questions is that these are issues that really are in the minds of many people. And they are very contemporary issues. You may disagree with the system of governance in this country or that, but those countries or that do use Google. So you said earlier you sort of bemoan the loss of deep reading. Well, what about the loss of deep thinking on these issues? Thank you.
Well, I'm assuming, by the way, that deep reading and deep thinking go hand in hand, but I think it's up to society as a whole how we want to do that. In the United States, I had been waiting for many years for an election that was determined by the internet. And I can tell you that it occurred in 2006. A particular senator in Virginia issued a racial epithet that he should not have. It was captured on YouTube. It was shown around. He was seen to be a racist, which was not a good thing to be if you're a senator. He lost the election in a very close vote. The Senate turned Democratic from Republican. The rest is history in American history. So on the margin, politicians that I know of in all the countries that I've spoken with are well aware of the fact that they're now under a microscope with respect to what they say and what they do. So I think the political outcome is very clear. In society, we see a lot of examples. One of the more interesting ones are called flash mobs, where people will organize themselves to go and do something spontaneous. And in my generation, this would be done word of mouth or with telephones, and now you can do that with things like Twitter and so forth. There's a huge debate about how powerful these tools are against repressive regimes and free speech and those kinds of things. Google is embroiled in this controversy with China and that sort of thing. I will tell you that eventually the tanks trump the internet. That it is still the case that you can roll the tanks and you can stop it, but people have long memories. And that's, I think, the contest that we're going to see in the next few years. I obviously believe that the social good of all of this will be phenomenal, that the rise of living standards, the sense of community is worth everything that I just talked about. Yes, sir. We had a question. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Raghu Venkatraman from Du, a telecom operator in the UAE. Your vision of cloud computing and many players, including the Microsofts and the Googles and others, being able to go through and understand and mine the data for proposing better services is very seductive. But if we're in the region, my worry would be, where would we get the technology and at the right stage of technology to be able to parse the data that we are collecting? Sure, there is enough data worldwide and through the transactions that people are engaging with us. My worry would be that the only people who are developing these algorithms, patent protected, are sitting out of Silicon Valley or somewhere else. How do we get access to that technology? Because it's not necessarily in the interest of those companies to bring that intelligence here.
It's interesting that I completely disagree with the premise of your question. So maybe that's just a difference in political worldview, or maybe I don't understand something about the culture here. But it strikes me that the technology that I'm talking about, data mining and so forth, is particularly appropriate to small and medium-sized databases as well. And that if you think of the Arab region as a moderate-sized set of companies and businesses growing much faster than anybody else, which is true, every company I can imagine, including Google, wants to be here to operate that way. So I view it as the inverse, that your position as a regional leader with fast growth makes it the case that the Silicon Valley companies want to be here with their data mining technology and so forth and so on, and we'll see what happens. I should also say that there are many consumer issues with respect to use of that information, and Google, as our questioner earlier said, gets freaked out with all the information we have. There are many, many things that Google could do that we chose not to do. For example, one day we had a conversation, but we figured we would just try to predict the stock market, and then we decided it was illegal, so we stopped doing that. So there are many, many things that you can do with that information, and we use our good judgment not to do it. Yes, sir.
Mr. Schmidt, Matt Kelly from the Daily Mirror. There was a time not that long ago when Google could do absolutely no wrong. We all loved Google. We loved everything you represented. Now, there is quite a deal of hostility around Google, and you've got problems over buzz. You've got the General Counsel of Microsoft calling for its customers to report you for anti-competitive behavior.
You've Microsoft. Such a stellar company.
They do have some insight into anti-competitive, that's true. Yes. But, and you've also got the smell of investigations in Europe and in the States. Where did it all go wrong?
I think, in fact, you're describing success. And my observation about Google would be three parts. I disagree with some of the things that you mentioned, but we can disagree. The first is that Google is a company that operates at scale, as I talked in my talk. The second is that we do things that are disruptive. So we try to use good judgment about things which are disruptive, and occasionally we do, in fact, break things, which is a problem. And the third thing, and perhaps most important, is we work in the area of information. And everybody in this room, every government, every group that you named has a very strong opinion about how information should be managed, controlled, dispensed, and consumed. I think that's really the source of it. I think this is what success looks like. Yes, sir.
Hello. Someone very famous said in the era of traditional media that the advertising works, I do not know which half.
Yes, it's a famous quote.
So if I were to take your argument forward, as the boundaries between traditional media and new media blur, and more importantly, as the advertising becomes Googleized, shouldn't half the advertising dollars disappear, especially on the traditional media?
Oh, that's interesting, because again, I come to a different conclusion with the same question. It strikes me that the growth of advertising increases because you have a direct connection with the money that you spend in revenue. And that money is going to get spent, but now you'll spend it smarter. I would argue that the budgets go up. So far, what we've seen is that once we can prove to a CEO and a VP of sales that our advertising leads directly to revenue, we can take as much money as they can give us with our systems working properly and with high quality. So we've not seen any limited demand on this. And I don't see any reason to think that this is a fixed pie. I think people want to sell things, and online advertising that's targeted, and I mean that with all of online, not just the web, television, tablets, all the kinds of things that are going to happen. I think it'll be a very large market. I'm not worried about that at all. We have time for a couple more questions. Go ahead, yes, sir.
Mr. Schmidt, I have a Spider-Man question.
Sure.
Spider-Man uncle said to him, with great powers come great responsibilities.
Yes.
And I think that Google is the first company, or well, definitely for our generation, to have such a profound and diverse impact on humanity.
Okay.
I just wanted to know if you think that at some point your future decisions, so when you plan things that you're doing, you will be allowed to take them with a small group of individuals that are driven by commercial reasons as opposed to being somewhat governed by some external bodies?
Google sees itself, maybe different from other companies, as a company with a mission about information and not a mission about revenue or profits or anything. We see ourselves in this different model. We are organized in an ownership structure that allows us to operate that way, not unlike newspapers in the United States. I think governments see us as both a friend and a threat, and so we're likely to be more and more regulated, or at least the threat of regulation, for precisely that reason. And we take our responsibility, in particular our end-user responsibility, very seriously. So an example would be, the earlier question said, oh, where did everything go wrong? Well, in many cases, it's because the people who are complaining are in a minority. We try to make the decision based on what the majority of a country or a citizenry appears to want, and consistent with their cultural value. And that seems to have served us well so far. And I think that will stay for many, many years. So my own view of Google is that this will continue for much longer than I'll be at the company. Let's see. We're going to run out of time pretty soon. Crispin, how much more time do you have? You want to call it out? Keep going. A couple more. Who has the mic next? Over. Yes, sir.
Hi, Omar from Giron.com. I was wondering, what do you think we can do as an Arab nation to switch from consumers of content to producers of content?
Yeah. This is well, the first thing is write more. I mean, literally write more. This particular region is investing heavily in advanced education. Universities are often the source of a lot of this information. The investment, all of the financial wealth is allowing for that. I think that is wonderful. There is a shortage of properly written, mature, globally distributed Arabic content. Our position is we want to digitize the Arabic libraries. We want to take all of the content that's in Arabic that's not been translated and translate it into English and other languages so people can consume it. And also, people need to spend more time literally producing the content. The Arabic websites have been slow to get built. The Arabic data centers have been slow to get funded. All of those are underway now. It's ultimately about a society producing its own content in a way that makes sense to it. If you look at the history of the internet, that was true. And a typical example is there's more Chinese content than English content now. And the cutover was a couple of years ago. And it's fundamentally because the Chinese joined the internet. And there's so many around the world. So again, it's a numbers game, and I think it's just a matter of focus. Let's see. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Cynthia Schneider of Georgetown University and the Brookings Institution.
Sorry.
I wanted to go back to your comment. I think if I understood you correctly, you said that in the end, tanks trump the internet. And I wonder if that isn't, I hope that's not true. I'm more of an optimist than that, and you're the one who should be the optimist about this.
By the way, I'm normally the optimist. I was referring to at the moment.
Well, but that's only maybe, and that's what I want to ask you about, because our governments are maybe kind of short-sighted and traditional. Iran is the obvious case here. And, you know, brute force seems at the moment to be triumphing, but that's because they've managed to shut down the means of communication. And they've done that with actually Western technology, as I understand it, that was sold to them unscrupulously. So, I mean, why isn't the answer that then people need to recognize that that's where the war is being fought, and it should be unjammed, and as I think many Iranians believe, eventually, if the information and communication can flow, which includes translation and all things you've mentioned, then ultimately the information and the connections triumph over the tanks?
That is certainly, I agree with your bias and your optimism. Let me point out that U.S. law prevents Google from operating in Iran. So we couldn't, even if we wanted to do what you're describing, it's illegal for us to do that. There's a discussion recently to change that law. It gives you an idea of where the old political dogma conflicts with a goal of information spreading. I have argued long time that the best way to liberalize a society is to get them communicating. And the rest is history. That's it. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Hi there. My name is Abdurrahman, and my question is, as a young Emirati and a young person from this region, and we're from the age of new media, and that's what we do every single day of our lives. You know, we can't leave the house or go on our BlackBerry without using Google or any other platform. My question is, because of our, being a young person, Google has been going all over the world. but you guys have not been here yet, being in this region, in this country, my country, basically having a Google branch where young people like us who want to enter this field, who want to be a part of this industry can come work and start creating stuff for our region going forward into the future. So that's my question, that why haven't you guys been here yet, since all the other companies has been here and they're already established here?
Well, the good news is we're already here through the power of the internet. So that's the first answer. The second answer is that our fastest growing operations in the entire world are right here in the UAE. And that is a perfect answer to end my overtime on. Crispin was licensed enough to live. Thank you so much, all of you. Okay, take care. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.